He looked me in the eye and said, "I'll pay you back, Mom, I promise." I believed him, not because of the words, but because I wanted to. I needed to believe that all the years I gave up things for him meant something, that helping him now would come full circle one day. But 5 years went by, no calls, no payments, just silence. So I sold the house he thought he'd one day inherit, and with the money, I bought something he never gave me back: peace. Before I go on, I want to thank you for being here. If you've ever given more than you should have, just to help someone you love, and then watch them forget you the moment they were okay, then you already know how this feels. Sometimes the hurt doesn't come with yelling, it comes with silence, distance, and being left out of the life you helped build. I gave what I had because I believed in him. But belief doesn't always come back the way you hope. If that's ever happened to you, I hope you'll share your story. Or if words are hard right now, just leave a simple note. I gave too much. That's more than enough. It says you understand. It says you felt it too. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from. It means more than you know. My name is Helen, I'm 68, and I spent most of my life folding hospital laundry, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when someone called in sick. I raised my son Kevin on quiet prayers, borrowed strength, and whatever food was left at the end of the week. I didn't grow up with much, and I didn't expect much, but I always hoped my son would have more than I ever did. That was the dream. Not a big house or fancy vacations, just to see him go further than I could without breaking his back to get there the way I did. I gave up a lot so he wouldn't have to. I stayed home when friends went on trips. I wore old shoes for an extra season or two. I watched the same coat get patched year after year and still made sure he had everything he needed and a few things he just wanted. There were times I skipped dinner so he could have seconds. I turned off the heater early some nights just to stretch the bill another week. I never told him that because I didn't want him to carry the weight. I wanted him to run free and dream big. He was always clever, always quick with a smile and a story. Even when he didn't do his chores, he'd flash that grin and say something sweet to make me laugh, and I'd let it slide. He had that way about him. I thought it was harmless, just a little charm. But charm, when it grows without accountability, becomes something else. You don't notice it at first. You just feel a little tug, a little give. And then one day you look up and realize you've been giving and giving and giving, and they've never once looked back to see if you had anything left. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the phone rang. I was folding a basket of towels, still warm from the dryer, when I heard his voice, soft, excited, a little rushed like he had good news but didn't want to sound too eager. He said he'd found the perfect car. Not too flashy, but dependable, clean, and just the kind of thing he needed to get his life going in the right direction. He'd gotten a job that required a commute, and the old car he was using had finally given out. He said it was just bad timing, that he had enough to cover most of it, but needed a small boost to close the deal. "Just until I'm on my feet, Mom. I swear you'll have every penny back." I didn't even stop to think. That's what love does. It answers before logic shows up. I told him I'd help. And I meant it. I didn't have a pile of money sitting around, but I scraped together $3,000 for the down payment. I went down to the dealership, signed the paperwork, and co-signed the loan so he could drive off the lot with the car he'd been dreaming about. I even covered the insurance for the first 6 months, just so he wouldn't have to worry. I told myself it was a gift, a gesture to help him get started, to ease a burden the world would one day place on his back. I didn't want him to feel alone in the storm. I knew that feeling too well. He was so happy that day, practically floating as he slid into the driver's seat. He honked twice as he backed out, smiling wide like a child with a new toy. I waved from the curb, trying not to cry. I told myself I was just being sentimental, that this was a good thing. But as the sound of the engine faded down the road, I stood there in the quiet, arms folded, the wind pulling at my sleeves. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just sending him off with a car. I was handing him years of sacrifice, years of yeses when my own life needed a no. And as I watched that taillight disappear, something deep inside me whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. I had just handed over a piece of myself, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. The first month passed and I didn't say anything. I figured maybe he was settling into the job, finding his footing, just a little too busy to call. The second month came and went, and still nothing. No update, no thank you, no sign that he remembered the promises he made with that soft voice and smiling face. By the third month, I sent him a message, nothing demanding, just a gentle check-in. Asked how the car was running, how work was treating him. He replied with a thumbs up. That was it, a thumbs up. And for some reason, that hit harder than silence. Because silence you can explain away with life. A thumbs up felt like a brush off. Still, I didn't push. I told myself maybe he was trying, maybe he was ashamed he couldn't pay me back right away. I held on to that idea tighter than I cared to admit. I wanted to believe he was better than that. So, I let it go. Month after month, I told myself stories to protect him, and to protect the version of him I still wanted to see when I closed my eyes at night. He was always so full of dreams. I didn't want to believe that all he'd grown into was someone who could take and walk away. But the truth didn't stay quiet forever. It started showing up in the little things. A friend of mine mentioned she saw pictures of him online, laughing at some rooftop party, holding a drink that probably cost more than my groceries for the week. I didn't look at first, I didn't want to know. But eventually, curiosity and hurt got the better of me, and I looked. There he was. Bright shirt, new sneakers, a girl on his arm, sunglasses perched on his head like he hadn't a care in the world. I scrolled through more. Trips, fancy dinners, new electronics. He looked like he was doing just fine. And there I was, sitting in a house with a leaking roof and a light bill I had to split in two just to make it stretch. I'd turn off the heater early to save, wear socks to bed, eat soup 3 nights a week, and tell myself it was fine. That it was just a rough patch. But seeing him like that, smiling on beaches I'd never even dreamed of walking on, something broke in me. And it wasn't just about the money. It was the way he'd so easily left me behind, the way he never once looked back to see if I was okay, after I gave up so much so he could be. I wasn't his mother anymore. Not in the way that mattered. I was just a forgotten bill in his mental drawer. Something he'd get to when it was convenient, when life slowed down, when he felt like it. And deep down, I knew. He never would. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first heard the knock. Not the hurried kind that comes with trouble or the hollow one from delivery drivers, but a soft, careful knock, like someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcome. I opened the door and there stood May, Kevin's daughter. 17, tall like her father, but her eyes were mine. She held a paper bag in her arms and gave me the kind of smile that felt real, the kind that didn't ask for anything. I hadn't seen her in a while. Kevin always said she was busy with school, friends, life. I never pushed. I didn't want to feel like I was begging to be remembered. She stepped inside, looked around quietly, and said nothing at first. But I saw her eyes pause on the crack in the wall near the ceiling, the one I had tried to cover with a crooked picture frame. Then her gaze drifted to the old space heater near the kitchen, the kind you only pull out when the central one gives up. She asked me if I was cold. I laughed a little and told her I was used to it. She didn't laugh back. The next time she came, she brought flowers, simple daisies from the market, wrapped in newspaper. She said she thought the kitchen looked like it needed something cheerful. I didn't argue. The time after that, she brought groceries, apples, a bag of rice, a pack of chicken thighs, and a box of my favorite tea. I asked her why she was doing all this, and she looked at me with a kind of sadness I hadn't seen in years. She said, "Grandma, this isn't right. Why is Daddy living large while you're rationing oatmeal?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to protect her from the truth. I wanted to say something kind about her father, about how maybe he didn't know, maybe life just got busy. But all I could do was look away. She didn't press me. She just started visiting more often. Sometimes with food. Sometimes just to sit and listen to the radio with me. Sometimes she'd help around the house without saying a word. Tightening the screws on the back steps, wiping down the kitchen tiles, putting fresh batteries in the old remote I never had time to fuss with. She didn't ask questions, she didn't lecture me or try to fix things. She just showed up, again and again, with quiet consistency. In a world where I had become invisible, she saw me. And not just as someone old or fragile or in need, but as someone who deserved to be acknowledged, to be remembered. She didn't say it out loud, but every small thing she did reminded me that I wasn't crazy for wanting to be treated with care. That I hadn't imagined the years I gave, or the silence that followed. She reminded me that showing up matters, even if the world convinces you you're no longer worth the visit. And with every bag of groceries, every flower she placed in an old glass jar, every warm look that didn't ask for anything in return, she gave me something I hadn't felt in years. She gave me back to myself. One morning, I woke up before the sun rose. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and makes the walls feel like they're listening. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the same wallpaper I'd stared at for over 20 years. A faded yellow with tiny flowers, now peeling at the corners like it too, had grown tired of waiting. I walked into the kitchen, and the floor creaked beneath me, louder than it used to. The fridge, bless it, made more noise than it ever cooled. A low, tired hum that sometimes rattled like it was asking to be put out of its misery. I opened it, hoping I hadn't forgotten the milk was near its end. The light flickered. The air inside was barely cool. I closed it slowly and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the sagging gutters and the damp spot near the back porch. The roof had started leaking again. Not badly, just enough to remind me that things were breaking faster than I could fix them. I'd patched that same corner twice. The bucket I kept under it had become part of the room. I no longer noticed it unless it was full. And standing there, barefoot in the morning chill, with the fridge wheezing behind me and a roof that had given up trying, a thought came over me like a shadow sliding across the floor. I'm living like I failed, just so he can live like he succeeded. I'm sitting in a house that's crumbling beneath my feet because I'm still clinging to the hope that one day he'll show up and care enough to ask how I'm doing. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. I didn't owe this house anything, and I didn't owe him a shrine to the childhood I built for him. I didn't need to keep it standing just because one day he might remember it had meaning. So I picked up the phone, called a local agent, and asked her what it might be worth. She came by the next morning, walked through the rooms with polite silence, and said she could list it right away. I didn't tell Kevin. I didn't tell anyone. For once, I did something just for me. Quietly, calmly, without permission. 6 days. That's all it took. 6 days and someone new had already seen value in what my own son had forgotten. I signed the papers, held the check in my hand, and didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. I felt light. That same afternoon, I walked into a small condo unit on the other side of town. Clean, simple. No memories hanging in the corners, no cracks in the ceiling, no echoes of unanswered phone calls. It wasn't big, but it didn't need to be. It was mine. And with what was left over, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I bought a cruise ticket. Just one, just for me. A week away from anyone needing anything. A week to sit by the water and remember what it feels like to take up space without apology. I didn't run it by anyone. I didn't ask if it made sense. I just chose myself. Finally, quietly, fully. It was about 2 weeks after I moved into the condo when I heard that knock again, but it wasn't soft this time. It was loud, hurried, the kind that makes your stomach clench before your feet even move. I opened the door, and there he was. Kevin, standing in the hallway like a storm in a suit. His jaw tight, eyes full of fire, holding his phone in one hand like it had just delivered a death sentence. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in, not because I owed him the space, but because I wanted to hear what he'd do with it. He didn't even sit down. He paced across the room once, turned toward me, and let it spill out in one breath. "You sold the house? Without telling me? Without even calling?" His voice was sharp, like I had taken something from him. Like I had broken some silent rule I didn't know I was still expected to follow. I looked at him and stayed still. Calm, steady. I waited a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted him to hear the silence his voice had left behind. When I finally spoke, I didn't raise my tone. I didn't match his anger. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Funny, you didn't help pay for it. But you wanted to inherit it?" He blinked like he hadn't expected that. Like it hadn't crossed his mind that I might have something to say back. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see him searching for a line, a way to defend the fact that he had abandoned the very thing he was now angry to have lost. I gave him a moment, but when he still had nothing worth saying, I went on. You stopped calling 5 years ago, but you remembered the deed number? He shook his head, frustrated, like I wasn't understanding what he meant. He said, but it's the family home. It's where I grew up. It's where we used to be. I nodded slowly, and for a second my heart softened. Not because I agreed, but because I remembered that little boy once running through the halls barefoot with jelly on his chin. I remembered birthdays, spilled juice, late-night fevers, and first day of school photos taken by the front door. But those were my memories, not his responsibilities. And memories don't keep a roof from leaking. They don't cover insurance or patch broken windows or carry groceries up threes when your knees are aching from age and silence. I looked at him and said, that house held a lot of love, but it also held too much weight. I carried it, alone, and when I couldn't anymore, I let it go. You don't get to be mad at me for surviving. He stood there, breathing heavy, hands clenching the phone like it could explain the distance he created. But it couldn't. And I wasn't going to apologize for choosing a life where I didn't have to wait for him to remember I existed. Not anymore. Not again. So I turned away, not in anger, but in peace. And I let him stand in that space between what he thought he deserved and what he had truly given. I had been ready for that visit long before he ever knocked on my door. Not because I expected him to come back with kindness, but because I knew, one way or another, the past would circle back. I had the folder tucked in the drawer beside my chair, right under the stack of crossword books and the old reading glasses I rarely needed anymore. It wasn't thick, but every page inside held a weight I had carried alone. When he stood there, still fuming, trying to make sense of the fact that I had moved on without waiting for his blessing, I quietly opened the drawer and pulled it out. He didn't understand what it was at first, just looked at it like it might be some old paperwork. But I placed it in his hands and I asked him, gently, to read it. Just read. No talking, no justifying, just read. The first page was a copy of the co-signed loan for the car. The one I signed without blinking. The one that tied my name to his dream and my credit to his decisions. I had highlighted the amount, the terms, and the signature at the bottom. Mine, neat and firm, next to his, rushed and crooked. He paused for a second, like he remembered that day at the dealership, but didn't say a word. The second page was a stack of receipts, 6 months of car insurance payments, auto-drafted from my checking account. Dated, paid, filed away by a woman who was still proud to help her son, still believing that help meant something. I watched his eyes move down each line, and I wondered if he ever once noticed those payments disappearing from my account, or if they had blended into the background, the way people like me often do. Then came the copy of our last message, just one. A quiet question from me during the second winter after I helped him. It read, "Can you help me with the water bill this month? It's a little tight over here." Beneath it, nothing. No reply, not even a red receipt. Just the empty space where a son's voice should have lived. I printed it because it was the loudest silence I've ever heard. And then the final page. My cruise ticket. 1 passenger, 7 days, paid in full. I could feel him stiffen when he saw it. His lips tightened, and for a second I wondered if he'd speak. But he didn't. He just stared at it like he didn't know what to feel. So I helped him. I said, "That's what I bought with your silence. Not revenge, not spite, peace." I took what was left of my trust, and instead of keeping it locked in that house waiting for someone who never came, I used it to see the ocean. To watch a sunrise without thinking of what I used to carry. He held the folder like it might fall apart in his hands. But I had already held those pages longer than I should have. Long enough to let go. Long enough to finally breathe without waiting on the sound of a car in the driveway that never came. Long enough to understand that love without return is a kind of debt. And eventually, you learn to stop collecting. The day after he left, I sat at the little table in my new kitchen, the one by the window that catches the late afternoon light just right. The chair was a little stiff, the room a little too quiet, but not the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. It was the kind that lets you breathe. I made myself a cup of tea, and just sat there for a while, watching the way the sun hit the counter. How it danced off the clean floor tiles. How there was no echo of anyone else's footsteps. No weight of waiting, no question of who might or might not call. Just stillness, soft and clear. The walls held no memories, no picture frames of years I could no longer return to. No dents from old furniture, no sounds of doors slamming after arguments I kept forgiving. It was just a space made new, untouched by the heavy parts of my history, and in that space, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Freedom. Not the kind that comes with money or trips or flashy choices, but the quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones and tells you that you don't owe your peace to anyone else's comfort. I decided to bake a pie that day. I hadn't baked in a long while, not since the holidays, where I cooked for people who only half listened and scrolled through their phones while I set the table. I used the same recipe I always had. Apples, cinnamon, just a little nutmeg, and a crust I still remembered how to make by feel, not measurements. The oven filled the place with that familiar warmth. And for a moment, it didn't matter that no one was coming over, or that no one had asked what I was doing that day. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt full. When I pulled it out and let it cool, I cut a slice and sat right there at the table, plate in hand, sunlight across my lap. I took a bite and I smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it tasted better than any Thanksgiving where I sat across from people pretending they still saw me. That pie wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't part of a performance or a duty or a desperate attempt to hold a family together. It was just for me. And it tasted like peace. Like a woman finally learning that you don't have to keep a chair open for someone who's already decided not to sit with you. It had been months since I handed him that folder. Months since he stood in my living room, holding proof of everything I gave and everything he chose to forget. And in those months, the silence returned, but it didn't sting the way it used to. It felt different now. Earned. Maybe. Chosen. Like I had finally stopped asking questions that never got answered. I settled into the quiet like it was a soft chair that had always been there, just waiting for me to sit down and rest. Then one evening, just as the light began to fade and I was rinsing a few dishes after supper, there was another knock. I dried my hands slowly. Something in me already knew who it was. I opened the door, and there he stood. Not angry this time. Not puffed up with entitlement or excuses. Just tired, uncertain, like someone who had finally realized that time doesn't wait for guilt to ripen. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't come bearing gifts or flowers or even a plan. Just his hands in his pockets and eyes that didn't know where to land. He said, "I didn't know you felt that way." His voice was low, almost careful, like he wasn't sure if the door might close again. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I didn't rush my answer. I held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then I said, "That's the thing about silence. It speaks loud if you know how to listen." He didn't say he was sorry. Not really. He shifted his weight, glanced at the floor, nodded like he understood, but no apology came. And you know what? I didn't expect one. Not anymore. Some people carry guilt like it's made of glass. They tiptoe around it, afraid of what might shatter if they speak it out loud. But I wasn't there to break anything. I was there to hold my peace. I stepped forward, wrapped my arms around him in a quiet, loose hug. Not the kind that says everything's forgiven, but the kind that says, "I remember who you were, even if I don't recognize who you became." It lasted just long enough. Then I pulled back. I didn't ask him to sit. I didn't put the kettle on. I didn't pretend we were going to start over. He looked like he wanted to stay, like he thought maybe the visit alone would fix what the silence had done. But I didn't move. And after a moment, he understood. He nodded once, small and quiet, then turned and walked down the hall. I closed the door gently behind him, leaned against it, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. He came back, yes. But the door wasn't wide open. Some things once closed are better left gently resting where they are. Sometimes I sit in this quiet space, cup of tea in hand, and let the stillness wrap around me like a soft shawl. I think about everything that led me here, not just the house, not just the loan or the silence or the way his voice used to sound when he needed something, but all of it. The weight of motherhood, the hope tucked into every sacrifice, and the heartbreak that comes not from being left, but from realizing you were never really held in the way you thought. I loved him. I still do. That kind of love doesn't vanish just because it goes unnoticed. But love, real love, the kind that nurtures and protects, it has to include you, too. And for too many years, I wasn't part of the love I gave. I was the giver, the doer, the one who said yes, even when I should have whispered no. I wrapped my care around others like a blanket and left myself in the cold. I don't regret helping him. If I had to do it again, I probably would. But if I could rewrite one thing, it would be this. I'd start living sooner. I wouldn't wait for permission to feel free. I wouldn't wait for the right moment to choose me. Loving yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. It's the slow rebuilding of trust in the one person you've always had. And it's not loud. It doesn't make announcements. It starts small, like sitting alone at the kitchen table with a slice of pie and realizing you don't feel empty. It's finishing a cup of tea without glancing at the clock to see who might need you next. It's going to bed and knowing that you didn't spend the day waiting for a call that never came. He might come around again, or he might not. But that's not where my peace lives anymore. It's not tied to his choices or his timing or whether or not he ever says the words I once needed to hear. Because it turns out, peace doesn't come when others repay you. It comes when you stop waiting. When you stop measuring your worth by someone else's recognition. When you finally understand that the life you built for everyone else can also be rebuilt for you. Quietly, softly, beautifully. If someone you once loved made you feel more like an obligation than a blessing, more like a line on a budget than a line in their heart, then you already know how it feels to be unseen. It's a quiet kind of hurt, the one that grows in the spaces between phone calls, in the moments when you realize your kindness wasn't returned because it was never meant to be. Sometimes we mistake convenience for love, thinking that being needed is the same as being valued. But they are not the same. And learning the difference is one of the hardest lessons there is. If this story touches something inside you, if you've ever given your all and felt left behind, I want to hear your story. Not to judge, not to fix, but to hold the space where your truth can live without shame. Tell me in the comments below, or if you're not ready for that, just say, I'm healing now. That simple truth is enough. It means you're moving forward. It means you're no longer carrying the weight of silence alone. Thank you for listening, for staying with me through this. I hope you will subscribe and join a community where stories like ours are heard, where no one has to feel forgotten or alone. Because sometimes the greatest healing comes simply from knowing someone is there, holding space for you to be seen and known exactly as you are. Thank you for watching.